Hey everyone, welcome back to the NPC Dungeon. Today, we're going over a little trick that took me a while to master, but really upgraded my games when I did. I'm talking about using player backstories. Now, not only did it take me a while to realize just how useful it was with keeping players engaged and giving them a reason to engage with the story, but it also took me even longer to figure out how to do it. This video will be more of a discussion of how I do it, rather than a list of tips and tricks that I use. But before this intro drags on for too long and I get a little carried away and start talking about how I do it, let's go ahead and get into how I do it. So let's get started and let's learn something. Now, what I used to do with the backstory is I used to find a particular part of the campaign that seems similar to one of my players' backstories, say it was related, and then give that character an arc. For example, I once had a player have a character be part of an assassin's guild. My players eventually went to a town that had been overrun by the big bad who used powerful magics to brainwash an assassin's guild. I realized the guilds could be one of the same, and my player had some cool character-driven stuff to do here, running into old brainwashed companions of theirs. There are a few problems with this. One is that I used to kind of have to wait and see, and it was pure chance whether or not their backstory would come into play. So it became pure chance whether or not they would be motivated to interact with the story based on their backstory. Another problem with that approach was that I really only ended up focusing on one character at a time, which inevitably ended up leaving out other players. Now let me say there is nothing wrong with focusing on one character at a time every now and then, and sometimes luck would have it that a story works really well with a certain campaign, but that won't always be the case. So what do I do now? Well, now I like to try to intertwine what my players come up with for the backstory with the story itself from the very beginning, rather than just injecting it in after the fact. A lot of the time when starting a new campaign, I don't even try to come up with anything too specific until I have my players' characters. I might have a concept. For example, I might want to run an escape room kind of game. Maybe the players have to solve a mystery at a magic school, or maybe they're about to embark and set sail on some great high seas adventure. Telling your players a general concept ahead of time also serves to give them inspiration. And then when they come back and tell you what they want to be, for example, maybe they want to be a know-it-all prodigy at the magic school or a newly minted ship's captain, it won't be hard for you to figure out how that works with the story at large. To go a little bit more in depth with how I do this, let's say that your player wants to be a newly minted ship's captain, and you have a story that involves the players going through some pretty dangerous waters to pick up some pretty dangerous cargo. Okay, we can work with this. Maybe the individuals who promoted the player did so knowing that the mission was dangerous. Maybe there are some big agents involved and they needed a fall guy, unknown to the player. Alternatively, if you want to run a magic school mystery where the professors have been disappearing, maybe the player who wants to play as a know-it-all prodigy has a certain mentor, a professor who they look up to, a professor who then goes missing. The two previous examples, and really everything I've talked about in this video up to now, are ways to work a backstory into the story right off the bat. And that is really the main point in this video. That's my technique that I use now. But there are a few things that I like to keep in mind while doing this, while working backstory into a campaign in general. One is to make sure that you have everyone's backstory involved in some way. There are obviously many ways of keeping your players engaged, but if you tie everyone in, that is a good start in making sure no one feels left out and keeping everyone's attention. Now, there are times when it can be difficult to work everyone into the story. Sometimes you have to get a little creative, and if for whatever reason you can't seem to do it for every single player in a given encounter, don't beat yourself up about it. Find ways to give those players time to shine. Maybe they're very stealthy. There might be an encounter where the players have to sneak. Maybe they're very smart. The players might have to scour a room for clues. Not only does this tie them into what's going on, but it also gives them a chance to help the other players even though they aren't being directly impacted by the events of the story in this encounter, thus tying the group together even more as a whole. I also like to keep the structure of their arcs in mind. Now, I'm not saying to be super rigid with, say, the dark moment, rising action, final bell, and all that stuff, and say your characters and your players have to do certain things at certain points in time. You're running a campaign, not running a novel. But what I'm saying is just to keep that stuff in the back of your head. Why? So that you can try to time everyone's arcs so they're kind of happening at the same time, at the same pace. Maybe you have one character investigating the disappearance of their friend and another looking for an ancient artifact. Maybe after finding a lead, contrivances are introduced at similar times. The latter might find out that someone else stole the artifact, and the former might find out who kidnapped their friend. Now, what this means for your story and how you set up for this is going to depend on the particular campaign you're running. So ideally, both subplots will be worked into the story at large anyway. But for an idea on how you might do this, maybe the same person who kidnapped the friend also stole the artifact, and this person is the big bad the party is bent on stopping in this particular story. This also helps to avoid the problem that used to come up all too often in my games, and that is what happens when one character's arc is completed before the campaign comes to a close. If you have some basic plot structure in the back of your mind, try to pace everything together, ideally all arcs will end at the same time, at the end of the campaign, ideally. Now, obviously that isn't always the case. Things happen and change, players skip ahead, figure things out, and sometimes jump way ahead in their arcs very early on. Obviously, you want to reward your players when this happens, but don't be afraid to discuss with them. Ask them if they're okay with you adding additional contrivances to their plotline. Ask them if they have any other directions they want to go in with their characters. And if not, that's fine too. Don't force plot on your players. Sometimes some players are just perfectly okay with running along with the story, and if that's how they have fun, who are we to stand in their way? And that's it for this week's DM advice. I really hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked the video, feel free to leave a like, subscribe if you really liked it, and comment down below if you have any feedback, think I missed something, or just want to say hi. I try to respond as often as I can. I release new pixel art time lapses on Sundays, new D&D stories on Saturdays, and new DM advice every single Friday. So come back next Friday where I'll go back to a topic that I discussed before on this channel and go over how I like to keep my players engaged and some tricks that I use to do that. Thank you all so much for watching. Feel free to check out two of my previous videos appearing on your screen right about now, and until next time, let's learn something.